So, as a techie, when
Mhm.
you moved into the film business,
Mhm.
uh, one of the things that the film business comes with is not everybody is employed. There's no discipline to come and check in at 8 a.m. in the
Yep.
morning. So, what are the learnings that you had out of that industry, which you believe uh, builds the flow state that you talk about?
You know what? I'm so glad you asked that question. That was perfectly teed up. Thank you for saying that because this is one of the they talk about when you're a fish, you don't really understand the concept of water because you're like, it just is, right? You're not like, I'm in water. I'm not in water because you're always in water. One of the things that I learned when I got back into tech after my film career was in tech when the pandemic happened and people had to confront, oh, we can't sit next to each other. We might get each other sick, right? We're going to be working from home or working remotely. One of the things I noticed was in my film career, film already for decades has had the full spectrum of work from home, hybrid work, in person work. And the way that happens in film is most films, and I did a couple of TV shows, but mainly film, most films begin remote. They are writers, creators sitting alone in their apartments, their homes, or in coffee shops or something like that for days or months at a time, working on something. And then once the project gets to a certain point, you start to have meetings, and maybe there's like a studio executive like myself interested. So maybe you have a meeting every week or 2 weeks where you sit, right? And it starts to become that rhythm. And then as the project gains momentum, you set up a production office and you probably go in a couple days a week. And suddenly there's a production designer there designing, well, let me tell you what this looks like, and you have a director and you have, costumers, what would these people wear? And you start to have that rhythm of like, well, it's hybrid. Like I'm writing at home because we're still doing script notes. We're trying to get Swami to star, but he has notes. So I have to rewrite his role, right? So you're doing that as a writer. And then you're also spending a couple of days in the office answering questions because people are talking about, what did you imagine here? The director wants to dig in with you. And then you're on set. It is completely synchronous all day long, like RTO, here I am for several months, right? I mean, you couldn't be more in the office than that. And then as you go into post-production, it goes back to there's an editor alone in a room with an editing setup, and people come in and out of that thing until finally the movie's kind of done, and then you're just going to screenings, and that whole spectrum exists in film. And I was like, wow, there's a great template for how things could work here that maybe not a lot of other tech CEOs had that experience being a senior executive at film studios or having been a producer in film. So that was really applicable to me to see what do you do at each stage of that remote to hybrid to in-person to hybrid to remote that keeps the team feeling energized and together and gives enough time for deep work. Because let's be honest, when you're on set and it's $125,000 a day to be on set, you're not sitting in your trailer doing deep work for 3 hours. The time for that is really hard. It's the early days when you're sitting there going like, if you and I were writing a script together, that you and I would cloister somewhere and say, oh, what happens next? What do you think should happen next? And I'll tell you, there are a number of writers I worked with that had very specific ways in which they did their deep work in places. Like, for example, when we did Independence Day, Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, with whom I'd started my first company when I was doing visual effects, they had this house down in Puerto Rico, in Puerto Vallarta, where they loved to write. And that was like their special place. And they would go down there and it was really hard to reach them and they could do deep work, right? They would go write the entire movie there to the point where when they were going to write, I think it was Godzilla, that house that they would rent had been rented out to someone else. And Roland called his agent, his attorney, and said, "Just buy the house. Just buy the house. I need to go down there with Dean. We have to write this. I don't care. Just get me that house." And he did. He bought the house and became, his Puerto Vallarta house. Same thing with like Alex Kurtz and Bob Orsi, amazing guys I worked with for 4 years, and they did Transformers 1 and 2, Mission Impossible 3, Fringe, the TV show, Star Trek, all this stuff, and they would go. We had an office at DreamWorks. they would go across the street and have their assistant rent them a hotel room at the Universal Hilton. And they would go there and just not answer the phone, just take the phone off the hook and sit there in this hotel room for several months and write the next Transformers movie. And that was their way of doing deep work, just saying in this period of time, it's so remote, we're not even going to talk to anyone. So I loved seeing that. I love seeing that. And I try to respect now more the creative process that I've seen how, deep work works.